Welcome everyone to आज के इस विश्लेषण में. Today, we're unpacking a really, and I mean really controversial, unfiltered interview recently given by former Supreme Court Justice Markandey Katju. We're going to take all the explosive claims, the anecdotes, and the hard data he threw out there and distill the whole shebang right here into clear, structured insights. Just to be absolutely clear up front, our goal today isn't to agree or disagree with him. We're just here to impartially break down the exact nature of his argument regarding the current state of the nation. So let's get right into it. Okay, let's dive into this. The explosive core thesis that basically anchors Justice Katju's entire worldview is this: no reform is possible without revolution. All institutions have completely collapsed. He's not just suggesting minor policy tweaks here, guys. He is making a sweeping, massive claim that the parliament, the bureaucracy, and the judiciary are entirely hollowed out. To understand exactly why a former Supreme Court justice is making such a radical claim, we really need to look at the specific evidence he presents. To wrap our heads around these massive claims, we're going to systematically deconstruct his arguments across 5 specific pillars. Number 1, the socioeconomic reality. 2, democracy and elections. 3, the Constitution and reservation. 4, the state of the judiciary. And finally, number 5, his proposed path of revolution.
All right, kicking things off with Section 1, socioeconomic reality. This is where Katju really grounds his extreme anger.
So Katju backs up his call for revolution with some seriously grim economic indicators. Take a look at this staggering number: 1.2 crore. That's 12 million. This is the number of young people Justice Katju points out are entering the Indian job market every single year. But here's the critical contrast he makes. Against this massive tidal wave of youth, he claims there are only about 500,000 organized sector jobs actually available. And because of this astronomical shortfall, he argues that millions of educated youth, we're talking engineers, PhDs, you name it, are literally forced into informal labor, utter despair, or even crime, just to survive. And building on that economic despair, he highlights some severe public health failures. He points straight to India's drop in the global hunger index from 101 down to 107. He calls out the absolutely tragic reality of worsening child malnutrition and anemia among women. On top of that, he contrasts this massive healthcare divide. On one hand, you have ultra-expensive, world-class private hospitals like Apollo or Max, which are completely unaffordable for the masses. And on the other hand, you've got vastly overcrowded public hospitals like AIMS, where thousands of poor citizens just languish without proper care. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the direct, striking comparison he draws with China. He notes that China has achieved this massive GDP, which he cites at around $30 trillion, precisely because, in his view, they don't have a democratic system and are just singularly focused on economic development. In stark contrast, he argues that India, sitting at a much smaller $3.8 trillion GDP, is basically trapped in a permanent election mode. Because there's literally always a state or national election around the corner, he claims Indian politicians are focused entirely on polarization and religious disputes rather than driving actual, on-the-ground economic progress. Moving on to Section 2, democracy and elections. And fair warning, his views here are highly polarizing and incredibly pessimistic. So the crucial point is how Katju actually defines Indian democracy today. He asserts that 90% of the democratic process is driven purely by feudal forces, specifically casteism and communalism. In his view, voters aren't actually looking at the merit, the education, or even the criminal record of a candidate. No, they're simply looking at the candidate's caste or religion. He goes so far as to say the democracy in India right now is basically just a tool amplifying these feudal dynamics, rather than actually uplifting the poor. Let's break that electoral critique down a bit further. He makes the highly controversial statement that voters act like sheep, just blindly voting along caste lines. He argues that even highly educated professors harbor deep-seated caste prejudice. And because of this, leaders deliberately divide society just to secure those vote banks. He uses Bihar as a prime example. His argument is that even if the voter lists were flawlessly unrigged, people would still vote strictly on caste lines, meaning simply swapping leaders, like replacing Nitish Kumar with Tejaswi Yadav, is completely irrelevant. The common man, he insists, is going to remain poor and hungry, regardless of who's sitting in the chief minister's chair. Which brings us to Section 3. Constitution and reservation. This is where he directly attacks the foundational framework of the nation. Here, Katju makes what is arguably one of his most startling claims. He argues that the Constitution was actually designed to create a deliberate illusion just to pacify the masses. By telling the public that, they are king and granting these theoretical fundamental rights like freedom of speech or liberty, he claims the system actively prevents the impoverished 75% of the country from rebelling. Because for a starving, unemployed citizen, he argues, freedom of speech is literally just a meaningless sham. Furthermore, he aggressively critiques caste-based reservations. He argues that reservations act as this lifelong crutch that actually prevents true empowerment. And, mathematically speaking, he claims it's a completely flawed promise. Why? Because government jobs represent a tiny, tiny fraction of a percent of the total population. So even with 100% reservation, millions would still be left out in the cold. Ultimately, Katju views identity politics and quotas as a modern continuation of the British divide and rule policy, basically a political stunt engineered specifically to stop the poor masses from uniting across caste lines. All right, let's pivot to Section 4, the state of the judiciary. Coming from a former Supreme Court justice, this insider perspective is pretty wild. Katju provides a really harsh insider's look at this specific number right here. 5 crore. That is the massive, almost unbelievable backlog of pending cases languishing in Indian courts today. Justice Katju illustrates this total collapse with a pretty powerful anecdote from his own time at the Allahabad High Court. He says a subordinate judge is supposed to handle a maximum of maybe 300 cases to actually function properly. Yet these judges were coming to him completely crushed under the weight of 20,000 to 25,000 cases. He likens it to asking a guy who can carry 100 pounds to suddenly carry a full-grown elephant. The system just collapses, and that's why you see cases dragging on for 20 to 25 years. But for Katju, it's not just about the delays. It's about deep-rooted corruption. To illustrate this explosive allegation, he actually cites a famous 2009 affidavit filed by former Union Law Minister Shanti Bhushan. This document alleged that out of 16 former Chief Justices of India, 8 were definitely corrupt, 6 were honest, and 2 were doubtful. Justice Katju uses this exact data point to support his claim that over half of the higher judiciary has completely lost its integrity, and that the number of corrupt judges is only going up. He also has some incredibly sharp words for how judges conduct themselves in the courtroom today. He loves quoting Sir Francis Bacon here. A much-talking judge is like an ill-tuned cymbal. Now, to be fair, he strongly condemns violent outbursts, like the recent incident where a shoe was thrown at Justice Gavai. But he argues that judges actually invite this kind of public backlash by acting like lecturers and handing out moral sermons in court, instead of just sitting quietly, listening, and speaking exclusively through their written judgments. Let's look at how he categorizes the bench itself. He draws this razor-sharp contrast between what he calls careerist judges and principled judges. On one hand, he harshly labels former Chief Justice D.Y. Chandrachud as a careerist, alleging that his judicial reasoning in highly sensitive cases like Ayodhya and Gyanvapi was compromised by a desire to secure his promotion to the top spot. But on the other hand, he holds up Justice H.R. Khanna as the absolute gold standard of a principled judge. This was a man who fearlessly sacrificed his own career and promotion by ruling against the government to protect fundamental rights during the 1975 emergency. Now we come to the final climax, Section 5, the path of revolution. What is his ultimate radical solution to all this? And this brilliantly illustrates his long-term vision. We've seen his total teardown of the institutions. So what's the fix? Well, step 1, the absolute categorical rejection of all caste and religious-based politics. Step 2, engaging in a Mahanjan Sangharsh, a great people's struggle. And he warns this isn't going to be quick. He says it will take 10 to 20 years and require immense sacrifice. And finally, step 3, establishing a brand new leadership driven entirely by modern scientific thinking and rapid industrialization, completely replacing the 2-penny politicians he claims are running the show today. Which brings us to the end of our analysis, leaving us with a massive, highly provocative question. Does India's future lie in reforming its current democratic and judicial systems? Or is Justice Katju actually right in his absolute conviction that a total ground-up revolution is the only way forward? Now, we aren't here to answer that for you, but we really hope this deep dive has helped you unpack the sheer depth and gravity of his arguments. Thanks so much for joining us, and we'll catch you in the next one.